When shame becomes identity. The invisible architecture of a child's inner world. A child's life is rarely shaped by one dramatic wound. More often, it is quietly directed by a single emotion that was never explained, not processed, not named, not held. In early childhood, shame is not simply a fleeting embarrassment. It is not just the blush after spilling milk or answering a question incorrectly. When left unattended, shame does something far more consequential. It reorganizes the child's internal architecture. It begins to whisper a conclusion. Something about me should not be seen. If that whisper is repeated often enough through silence, misunderstanding, or subtle misattunement, it hardens into identity. And that is where the real story begins. This lecture is not about fixing children. It is about understanding why some children withdraw before they are corrected, why they disappear before they fail, why they choose silence before anyone asks for an explanation. We will not treat shame as a moral weakness or a personality trait. We will examine it as a structure of consciousness, because shame, when neglected, does not remain an emotion. It becomes a lens. At first, the child may simply appear shy, or sensitive, or cautious. Over time, however, something more specific emerges. The child who does not try. The child who gives up before explaining. The child who apologizes without wrongdoing. The child who lowers themselves in every relationship. The child who appears agreeable but internally lives in constant self-surveillance. Parents often respond with familiar explanations. That's just their temperament. They're naturally reserved. They need more confidence. But temperament is not the same as crystallized shame. When shame solidifies, it alters how the child processes experience. And if we intervene at the wrong level, behavior instead of structure, we deepen the fixation. The 5 layers of experience. To understand how shame becomes identity, we can borrow an ancient psychological map, what Buddhism calls the 5 aggregates. We do not need to approach this religiously. These 5 layers describe how raw sensation becomes identity. 1. The body form. The body reacts before thought. A child's chest tightens, breath shortens, face freezes, shoulders collapse. This happens before language, before reasoning. The body remembers what the mind cannot articulate. When shame is deeply wired, the nervous system treats exposure as danger. The child is not choosing withdrawal. Their physiology is selecting survival. 2. Feeling effect. The child feels discomfort, embarrassment, contraction, but may not possess the vocabulary or safety to express it. They feel it, but cannot say it. Unspoken emotion does not disappear. It accumulates. The problem is not that the child lacks feeling. It is that they lack a safe channel through which feeling can move. 3. Perception, interpretation. After repeated experiences, the child draws conclusions. If I speak, I'll be corrected. If I try, I'll be embarrassed. If I expect something, I'll be disappointed. These are not logical arguments. They are automatic interpretations layered over feeling. Once perception hardens, the child no longer encounters situations freshly. Every moment is filtered through pre-written conclusions. 4. Volition, directional will. At this stage, the issue is no longer fear of failure. It is fear of re-experiencing shame. So the child says, I don't care. It's fine. I'm not interested. But the truth is subtler. It is not indifference. It is avoidance of exposure. The will does not disappear. It redirects itself toward safety. 5. Consciousness identity. Finally, the child defines themselves. I'm just shy. I'm not good at things. I'm not the kind of person people expect much from. When this level crystallizes, shame is no longer situational. It becomes ontological. The child is not experiencing shame. They are being shamed. And once identity forms around that conclusion, experience is recruited to confirm it. why confidence is the wrong prescription. At this point, telling the child to be brave is ineffective. Encouragement does not dissolve structural shame, because what needs healing is not performance, but permission. A child trapped in shame does not need instruction first. They need an environment in which consciousness can flow again. An environment where the body does not brace automatically. Emotions can be expressed without penalty. Mistakes do not define identity. Presence is not contingent on performance. In Western psychology, we might call this secure attachment. In existential terms, we might call it unconditional regard. In spiritual language, we might call it grace. But practically, it looks simple. The child experiences relationship that does not withdraw when they do nothing. Acceptance that does not require explanation. Togetherness that is not earned. Over time, the nervous system recalibrates. The body learns, I am not in danger. Feeling learns, I can move. Perception learns, this moment is not the past. Will learns, I can act without disappearing. Consciousness learns, I am allowed to exist. Notice what changes not behavior first, but structure, the deeper question. And now we arrive at a question many parents quietly hold. Why does one child internalize shame so quickly, even in a relatively stable home? Why does reassurance not penetrate? Here we move into more controversial territory. Some philosophical traditions suggest that consciousness carries tendencies, what we might call inherited patterns, predispositions of vigilance, self-doubt, or self-suppression. You do not need to interpret this as literal past lives. Even within Western frameworks, we recognize intergenerational transmission, epigenetics, implicit memory, inherited nervous system patterns. Some children arrive already vigilant, already self-monitoring, already quick to blame themselves. For these children, discipline is not enough. Explanation is not enough. Achievement is not enough. They require something deeper. Existential permission. The experience that their being, not their doing, does not threaten connection. Redefining recovery. Recovery does not mean eliminating shame entirely. It means restoring fluidity among the layers of experience. The body no longer freezes at exposure. Feeling can move and be named. Perception is not distorted by past injury. Will is free to act without self-erasure. Consciousness is no longer rigidly defined by deficiency. Recovery is not loud. It is subtle. It is the moment a child stays present instead of withdrawing. The moment they attempt something imperfectly. The moment they do not apologize for existing. That is structural healing. If this perspective helps you see a child differently, not as resistant, but as reorganized by shame, then continue this journey. Because understanding a child's behavior is not enough. We must understand the architecture beneath it. And somewhere right now there is a child who is not speaking, not because they have nothing to say, but because they learned that visibility is unsafe. Our task is not to force speech. It is to make existence safe again. When consciousness learns to pause from shame to wisdom. In the previous talk, we ended with a simple but demanding task. Not to force the child to speak, but to make existence safe again. Now we continue, because safety alone is not the final goal. Safety is what allows something deeper to happen. It allows consciousness to pause when reaction becomes choice. In the architecture of experience, the next layer is what classical Buddhist psychology calls volition, the stage of reaction and choice. To say volition becomes free does not mean the child becomes passive or emotionless. It means something far more subtle. It means that when anger rises, the child does not automatically explode. When embarrassment appears, they do not instantly disappear. When fear emerges, they do not reflexively avoid. There is a gap, a space, a fraction of a second in which reaction is no longer destiny. In neuroscience, we might call this response inhibition. In philosophy, we might call it agency. In spiritual language, we might call it awakening. Whatever term we use, the meaning is the same. The child is no longer imprisoned by automatic patterns. For a child trapped in shame, this is revolutionary, because shame at its worst operates as a preemptive strike. It blocks action before action begins. I won't try. I can't. What's the point? But when volition softens, something new becomes possible. I felt embarrassed, but I stayed. I was nervous, but I spoke. That is not confidence. That is freedom. When consciousness stops judging. The final layer is consciousness itself, the center of awareness. When consciousness is immature, it behaves like a judge. I'm wrong. They're wrong. I failed. I embarrassed myself. It renders verdicts quickly and permanently. But when consciousness matures, it shifts roles. It becomes a witness. Instead of I am a failure, it says embarrassment is here. Instead of I am defective, it says that moment felt painful. This is not denial. It is differentiation. The self is no longer fused with the event. And when that happens, shame changes character. It is no longer a sentence. It becomes information. When the 5 layers flow together. Let us summarize the healthy movement of these 5 layers. The body does not freeze in unnecessary alarm. Emotion is felt without being suppressed. Perception does not distort reality into catastrophe. Volition can pause before reacting. Consciousness observes instead of condemns. When these layers function in continuity, experience flows. And when experience flows, the child can say something extraordinary. I was embarrassed, but it was okay. That sentence is not trivial. It is evidence that consciousness has resumed movement. Where is the child stuck? At this point, the question becomes practical. When you look at a child struggling with shame, you must ask, where is the interruption? Is it in the body? Some children react physically before they speak. Shoulders tight, eyes avoiding contact, breathe shallow in new spaces, frequent stomach ache. Asking, why are you like this, misses the point. The issue is not explanation. It is safety at the sensory level. For these children, shame lives in muscle memory. Is it in emotion? Some children say, I don't know. When asked how they feel, their emotional vocabulary is blurred. They may respond with irritation or silence. This is not emotional emptiness. It is learned emotional danger. They have internalized a message. Feeling is disruptive. For them, demanding emotional articulation can intensify shame. What they need first is shared presence, not interrogation. Is it in perception? Other children predict failure before events unfold. I'll just get in trouble. No one will listen. They'll think I'm weird. This is not pessimism. It is interpretation hardened by repetition. Logic rarely dissolves this pattern because perception is reshaped not by argument, but by new experience. Is it in volition? The most visible case is the child who refuses to try. I'm not doing it. I'll mess it up. This is often mistaken for laziness. But internally, the equation has already been written. Attempt exposure. Exposure shame. Therefore, do not attempt. Telling such a child, you haven't even tried, only reinforces the fear. Volition does not loosen through pressure. It loosens through experiences in which nothing catastrophic happens. Or is it in consciousness itself? Some children speak like adults. It's just my personality. I'm the problem. I'm too sensitive. These statements sound mature, but often they signal premature self-definition. Shame here is not imposed by others. It comes from an internal judge. At this level, praise and advice can be absorbed into further self-monitoring because the child is no longer relating to others' opinions. They are relating to their own verdict. Intervention has an order. A critical principle emerges. You do not repair all layers at once. If the body feels unsafe, you cannot reason with identity. If emotion is blocked, you cannot demand bold action. If perception is distorted, You cannot argue it into clarity. Intervention must move from the outermost layer inward. Safety of body, safety of emotion, flexibility of perception, freedom of volition, maturation of consciousness. Reversing this order produces resistance, not healing. When shame becomes wisdom, now we arrive at a profound redefinition. Shame is not inherently pathological. Pathological shame says, I am wrong. Mature shame says, that action wasn't aligned. Notice the difference. One condemns existence. The other refines behavior. A healthy self is not one that never feels shame. In fact, the absence of shame may signal a lack of moral sensitivity. A mature self holds two capacities simultaneously. The stability not to be destroyed by it. When these coexist, shame transforms. It becomes an ethical compass rather than a prison. The role of parents and educators, then, is not to eliminate shame, but to accompany the child through it. Not to rush correction, not to impose interpretation, not to conclude before the child concludes. Instead, to offer statements like, that must have felt uncomfortable. I can see how that would be hard. These are not techniques. They are permissions for consciousness to continue flowing. When maturity deepens, the child's inner voice changes from I'm wrong to I learned, from I'm inadequate to I need adjustment, from I can't to I'll try differently next time. At that point, consciousness is no longer a judge. It becomes wisdom, a question that remains. And yet one question lingers. Why do some children without obvious trauma in relatively stable homes still seem unusually self-conscious from an early age? Why do they brace before criticism comes? Why do they monitor themselves before anyone else does? Early parenting explains much, but perhaps not all. In the next lecture, we will move further back, before behavior, before language, even before birth. We will examine whether temperament, sensitivity, and early shame may be linked not only to postnatal experience, but to the very threshold at which consciousness enters embodied life. What if phenomena like intense prenatal sensitivity, even something as common as severe morning sickness, can be interpreted not merely as biological symptoms, but as early signals of an encounter between nervous systems? What if some children approach the world cautiously from the very beginning, not because they were harmed, but because their consciousness was already finely tuned? And if this perspective has helped you see a child not as fragile, but as structurally reorganized by shame, share this conversation with others walking the same path. Because somewhere right now, there is a child who believes that visibility is dangerous, and perhaps what they need most is not courage first, but continuity of relationship strong enough to hold their embarrassment without breaking.